So, welcome everybody to our first session of the third cycle of international seminar and webinar Heraldry in Traveling European Legal Manuscript. We organized by the UC Illuminatum research team in collaboration with the Institute for Medieval Studies of the Nova University in Lisbon and with the Português Institute of Heraldry. We are very, very happy and proud because we are yet at our third cycle of webinar. It means that the webinar have, and this subject, this topic had success. And so I welcome my co-organizer Miguel Sestes and the speaker of this session, Sofia Orsino and João Portugal. And now I leave the floor to Miguel Sestes that will introduce our speaker. So, Miguel.
Thank you, Alessandra. It's really very nice to be in the third edition of this webinar of ours, and I think it proves that this is a successful cooperation between art historians and heraldists, and I hope we can manage to continue this collaboration for many and many years. So our first session of this edition of our webinar is will be shared by two presentations. The first one will be by Sofia Orsino. She's a researcher at SISMEL, Società Internazionale per lo Studio del Medioevo Latino, and she obtained in 2021 her PhD in Latin paleography by the Università degli Studi di Firenze, concerning the reconstruction of the library of the Florentine Benedictine monastery of Santa Maria, known as Badia, Fiorentina, and the catalogue of the Latin manuscripts. She has recently been admitted at the 7th International Training Course on Manuscripts Issues at SISMEL, a 6-month program of seminars focused on the paleographical, codicological, and codicographic side of the handwritten tradition created by Agostino Paravicini Bagliani and Gabriella Pomaro. She is now working on a number of case studies that have emerged from the set of manuscripts that she catalogued in her thesis, such as those related to the Portuguese abbot Gomes e Anjos and to the humanist Antonio Corbinelli. And that's why she will present to us today this presentation about a juridical illuminated manuscript between Florence and Portugal in the 15th century. Sofia, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good evening again to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this really interesting webinar. I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, just a moment. I'm trying to share, but I have some issues about the privacy system and security of my computer. Sorry, just a moment. Can you see my presentation?
Perfectly.
Okay. So in my paper, I'd like to deal with a 15th century Latin manuscript that contains the Repertorium iuris by Giovanni Nicola de Milis, and seems to be the result of influences and contacts between Italy and Portugal. In my opinion, this 15th century codex written in Latin presents some elements related to peculiar events involving the Kingdom of Portugal and most probably the Curia of Pope Eugene IV. I will present an analysis of the illumination, and then I will focus on codicological and paleographical aspects in order to reconstruct the context of this codex production. The manuscript Conventi Soppressi A42554 of the National Library of Florence is a paper codex composed of 171 sheets. The codex arrived in the Badia, Fiorentina, the Benedictine monastery of Florence, called also St. Mary, by the 15th century and remained there until the beginning of the 19th century. After the suppression of religious congregation, it was transferred to the Biblioteca library, today National Library of Florence, Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale di Firenze. The Badia Fiorentina, a Benedictine monastery of ancient foundation, had a significant collection of manuscripts, probably only from the 30s of the 15th century, when the monastery had a new guidance offered by the men arriving from Santa Giustina of Padua. The collection was enriched thanks to the contribution of donations and legacies throughout the 15th century and beyond. At the time when the first inventory of the library was drawn up, the abbey owned about 819 volumes. The Codex Conventi Soppressi A42554 represents the most fascinating case among the five preserved illuminated juridical manuscripts belonging to the Florentine Abbey. It has not attracted the attention of scholars so far, not even in the context of research on the relation between Florence and Portugal in the 15th century. In the absence of notes of possession, subscriptions, and other testimonies preceding the codex entry in the Badia Fiorentina, the analysis of the sumptuous decoration of the first folio represents the starting point for the reconstruction of its origin. As we see, the first folio is entirely decorated. Now we have the entire sheet, and there is the particular of the first folio. There is an illuminated panel to introduce the first column of text and a very rich marginal frieze, historiated and decorated, which stands in the four margins. For the rest, the decorative apparatus is limited to pan-flourished initials in red and blue, and minor simple initials in red or blue. As required also by the alphabetical order of the repertory, we find major initials at each change of letters, while the lemmas start with minor initials. The scenes painted in the margins of the first folio can be read according to our interpretation in an anti-clockwise direction, starting from the panel supported by two small twisted columns. The figure represented is a high prelate, portrayed frontally half-length, with a mitre and a cope fastened with a clasp, both gilded and gem-studded. The personage appears in an attitude of blessing, looking out of a window defined by green and gold curtains. Behind him, a green canopy completes the scene. The clothes of the prelate seem to refer to the personality of a bishop. Below, we see a siege in which a fleet is heading towards a fortified city, while groups of soldiers on land are assaulting the walls. On the left, there is an armed clash, while on the right, there is the flight of civilians from the city. The soldiers arriving from the sea wear crusader armor and shields that can be traced back, as we see later, to the Kingdom of Portugal. In the city, people have white shields with 4 golden symbols. On the entrance gate, we see armored figures larger than those of the citizens. In the background, there is a landscape which seems to connote geographically the territory. The scene continues in the right margin. People on escape are oriented in this direction, on foot and on horseback. From below, the figures climb upwards along a rocky road that runs alongside a watercourse. In the mostly barren landscape are represented lions and a swan, and higher up a bucolic scene, with a shepherd playing an instrument surrounded by his flock. At the highest point of the outer edge, a fortress with palm trees and minarets seems the ideal point of arrival of the exiles. The population represented in the act of fleeing the city wears Oriental clothing. This element, together with the depiction of minarets, as well as the appearance of tower, vegetation, and fauna, helps to support the hypothesis that the scene refers to a Muslim kingdom in North Africa. The presence of the coats of arms of the Portuguese royal family of Avids stands out in the central section of the page, between the columns on writing. Their presence makes it possible to link the siege to the historical events of Portugal, dating back to the first half of the 15th century. The coats of arms refer to the 6 sons of King John I of Portugal. From the left, hoisted on long spears, are the coats of Peter of Avids, Ferdinand, Harry the Navigator, John, and finally Alphonse, natural son of King John and Count of Barcelos, later Duke of Braganza. In my opinion, the siege scene refers to the reign of Edward, eldest son of John I, who ascended to the throne in 1433. The flag of the kingdom, the first in the upper left corner of the scene, may be referred to his reign. The dynasty of Avids have promoted many naval expeditions, particularly on the coast of Africa. The first and most famous led to the conquest of Ceuta. But at the time of Ceuta, the cadet sons of King John and Ferdinand were too young and did not participate to the expedition. These 2 princes, moreover, died prematurely. The presence of their flag in the decoration of the first sheet of the Florentine Codex leads, therefore, to place chronologically the realization of the miniature between the beginning of the reign of Edward and the death of John, that is between 1433 and 1442. Also, Ferdinand died in 1443, following an expedition which began during the reign of Edward and aimed to conquer the coast of Africa. Together with his brother, Henry the Navigator, Ferdinand was one of the most ardent supporters of the need for an action to complete the expansion project started by King John I. After the death of John, Edward was forced to take the initiative to conquer Africa. He launched a new expedition to Morocco led by his brother Henry. All the brothers were called to officially express their opinion on the advisability of a war against the Maronites of the Kingdom of Fez. In spite of the enthusiasm of Ferdinand and Henry, both in search of military glory, Edward had held a more cautious attitude, also shared by John, Peter, and Alphonse. Edward sought papal support for a war against the infidels. Having obtained the approval of the crusade, all the princes devoted themselves to the preparation for the expedition. The expedition left Lisbon for the coast of Morocco in August 1437. The fleet would head for Ceuta with Henry and Ferdinand, and from there to Tangier. Edward and Peter would have approached the theater of the war by moving to the Algarve, ready to bring aid if needed. However, the Portuguese fleet was short of ships, and a third of the soldiers could not take part in the expedition. In the first days of September, Henry's men marched from Ceuta to Tangier, while Ferdinand reached the city by the sea with other troops. The Portuguese placed their camp between the walls of Tangier and Cape Spartel and attempt a siege. The first assault failed because of the serious problem of equipment and the lack of awareness of the territory. However, Henry was determined to continue with the siege, even if Commander Al-Wattazi arrived to help the Moroccan forces. In October, Prince Henry was forced to sign the capitulation with Salah ben Salah, commander of the garrison of Tangier. Prince Harry would remain a prisoner until Ceuta was returned to the Sultanate of Morocco. In order to prevent his brother Edward from giving up Ceuta for his freedom, it seems that Ferdinand had courageously chosen to remain a hostage. After spending 6 years in prison, he died in 1443, earning the title of the Holy Prince. In the miniature, the Portuguese ships, the flags of the princes, the city under siege, as well as the clothes of the civilians and the geography of the place, lead us to believe that the illumination represents the siege of Tangier in 1437. This hypothesis is based mostly on the identification of the coats of arms of the House of Avids, but the representation of the city with its landscape behind and its gates on the coast finds significant parallels in subsequent representation of the city. First and foremost, the Pastrana tapestries realized when the conquest of Tangier was successful, and also the representation of the city in Civitatis Orbis Terrarum. As we know, the undertaking of Tangier in 1437 was unsuccessful, so we have no reason to believe that the manuscript was realized after the defeat. At the beginning of 1438, the rumors of the defeat had fully spread, so we must imagine that at the moment of the illumination of the Codex, the news of the capitulation of Henry and Ferdinand was still far away. I leave aside for a moment a number of observations concerning the possibility of dating the Codex and turn to the relationship between the text of the Repertorium and the subject of the miniature. The illumination described so far has not a direct link with the content of the Codex, but what clearly emerges from the miniature is the central role of the prelate's blessing. Even in the facts of the Crusade of 1437, we see a close bond between the Avids family and the Holy See. When King Edward approached the project of the Crusade in Morocco, he wanted to ensure that the Pope could grant Christian princes to undertake wars toward non-Christian states. For this reason, he turned to Eugene IV for his approval. The Pope gave a favorable response to the King's request by issuing the bull Rex Regum and delegating the juridical question to Antonio Minucci da Pratovecchio and Antonio da Roselle. The two jurists, both professors at the Studium of Bologna, sent two separate consulta on civil and canonical law without directly addressing the question of the Portuguese Crusade. Despite King Edward's interest in the legal implication of the war in Morocco, the De Milis repertory does not have a direct link to the event which the illumination refers to. The author of the Repertorium, Giovanni De Milis, had been a member of the Sacra Rota at the time of Pope Eugene IV, but not even a link of his legal activity with the Portuguese expedition on Tangier is known to date. Now that I have tried to clarify that there is no relation between the text and the illumination of the Codex, I go back to the reconstruction of its provenience, starting from these last very observations. The figure of the blessing bishop, the coats of arms of the princes, and that one of the Kingdom of Portugal seem to refer to a context of happy relations between civil and ecclesiastical power. The relations between the Portuguese court and the Pope was particularly animated in the years of the Council of Constance and later of Basel and Ferrara. The years of the councils represent, in my opinion, the historical background in which the event of the Portuguese Crusade is set, even if there isn't a clear reference. The elements depicted in the miniature appear to be more directly related to the circumstances of the historical event of the Crusade, according to a narrative clearly set in the Portuguese perspective, rather than to the legal issues that were behind it, and in which the protagonists were Eugene IV and Edward of Avids. Between 1436 and 1438, Eugene IV was in Bologna. In October 1436, the Pope issued the bull Rex Regum, with which he granted his support to the crusade, assuring Portugal the right to wage war against Saracenos Italios Infideles. On January 23rd, 1438, the Pope and his court left Bologna to join the first session of the Council of Ferrara, which opened on that month in the Cathedral of St. George. Between 1419 and 1440, the Badia Fiorentina, the Florentine monastery to which the manuscript finally arrived, was run by the Portuguese abbot Gomesianis, a figure who played a leading role in those years for both the Pope and the King. After arriving in Italy, in Padua, as a law student, Gomez took the Benedictine habit in Santa Giustina, and from there was sent to lead the reform in Florence. Even from Florence, however, Gomez continued to cultivate friendly relations with his homeland and especially with the ruling family. Because of his closeness to Pope Eugene IV, strengthened by the common spirit of spreading the Reformation memories of the Benedictine order, for King Edward, the abbot represented a diplomatic bridge with the papacy. Just at the end of 1436, Gomez had completed a second trip to Portugal, started in September 1435. On that occasion, as apostolic ambassador, he had the task of mediating between the Pope and the Portuguese king. He was also welcomed in the Council of King Edward and was charged to defend the Portuguese interests in front of the Pope. As the crusade unfolded, Gomez's influence in the ecclesiastical world was of primary importance to the Princes of Evis. Already in 1435, the abbot was the mediator of various requests for the granting of privileges and indulgences for members of the Portuguese royal family. On those occasions, Gomez had the opportunity to sound out the disposition of the Pope towards a crusade led by Portugal. The Pope seemed to be in favor of the crusade. Edward had appointed his own permanent legate in the Papal Curia to follow up on his requests, probably responding to a hint from Gomez himself. The testimony offered by the collection of letters of the abbot of the Badia Fiorentina, published in 2017 by Rita Costa Gomez, clearly shows his constant commitment to support the royal family, especially in 1437. The correspondence with the king, assiduous throughout that year, gravitated almost exclusively around the delicate issues to be reported to Eugene IV, as can be understood from the content of the letters in March and May 1437. So Gomez was a key figure in the acquisition and maintenance of papal support for the Kingdom of Portugal. In July 1437, the fleets were ready to leave, with Prince Henry leading the army and Peter ready to join the troops from Porto. On the inauguration day of the crusade, a public ceremony was held in Lisbon in the presence of the rulers in the church of Santa Maria do Carmo, followed by a procession in which the bull Rex Regum was made public. In August, Gomez was informed of the rumors circulating in the papal court in Bologna about the first stages of the expedition led by Henry. To confirm the blessing granted by the Pope to the crusade, on October the 8th, Eugene IV celebrated a solemn mass pro rege Portugalie in Bologna, a gesture long urged by Edward himself. But in October, Portugal had already signed the Act of Surrender following the failure of the siege of Tangier. But the news about the progress of the crusade had reached Italy with a considerable delay. Only in December, in fact, Gomez received updates from the papal secretary Gonzalo Anesteobidos about the rumors circulating in Curia, according to which Princes Peter and John and Count Alfonso had sailed to the rescue of Henry and Ferdinand. Gonzalo had then confirmed the tragic outcome of the expedition in a letter of January 1438. In February, the merchant Alfonso Eanes reported on the complex situation following the capture of Prince Ferdinand, in which Edward had found the council divided between the opinion of Peter in favor of surrendering Ceuta for the freedom of his brother, and that of John and the Count of Barcelo, who aimed to save Ferdinand without losing Ceuta. The role of Gomez Yanes for the years of the crusade against Morocco emerges clearly, and the temptation to see in the abbot of the Badia Fiorentina a possible recipient of the manuscript is strong. However, the moment in which the codex arrived in the Florentine monastery remains to be clarified. The study of the documentation related to the monastic library in which the codex of the Repertorium was preserved leads to believe that it arrived in Florence well before the end of the 15th century. On the verso of the first folio, there is in fact a note of possession of the monastery, iste liber es congregationis Sancti Justine, Ordinis Sancti Benedicti, Deputatus Monasterio Sancte Mariae Sive Badia Fiorentine, Signatus unde Viginti, which also mentions the congregation of Santa Justina and dates back to the initiative that involved at least 22 Latin manuscripts before 1504. The name of the congregation changed that year in 1504 into Congregazione Cassinese. So this note was before the change of the name. On the basis of these evidences, we cannot establish how much time passed between the production of the codex and his arrival in the monastery, but we do know that it arrived there by the end of the 15th century. The centrality of the relationship between Gomez Yanes and the House of Abbots in the years of the Crusades leads to the hypothesis that the Portuguese abbot may be the recipient of the codex in which the expedition was illuminated. I will try to summarize now some considerations that have emerged from the study of the writing and from the study of the material of the manuscript, and then move on to a comparison with other known manuscripts in order to question the context of production. The training of the copyist of the Repertorium was most probably in a Gothic graphic context. The headwords are in littera textualis of large form and incipits of the internal section in a mixed alphabet of uncial and capital letters. The script of the text is a littera bastarda of the same hand. In the writing of the text, we see also some elements typical of the humanistic scripts, such as ampersand and a straight S at the end of the words. The humanistic variants appear to be quite rare, and they are handled with little confidence. They are also completely absent in the second half of the codex. The writing, on the whole, is characterized by a certain regularity, but without ambitions of refinement and elegance. In light of the elements presented so far, it is possible that the scribe had a certain familiarity with chancery writings. The unknown scribe seemed to be more familiar with the Gothic script, for example, for the headwords, and the strokes of the words in littera textualis are also mostly broken. These elements lead us to think that we are not dealing with an Italian scribe, but with someone who had come into contact with humanistic writings spread from Florence in the first 10 years of the 15th century. The miniature and the text seem to confirm the possibility of a copywork that can be chronologically placed in a period in which the littera antiqua was widespread in Italy. Some tendencies in the writing seem to have links with Iberian littera textualis, especially in the breaking up of the etching and in the resolution into rhomboidal forms of the bodies. From the mixture of a Gothic base of Iberian origin and humanistic variants not yet assimilated, seems to emerge a context of contacts and hybridization, as could have been the condition of a foreign scribe in Italy. The scribe could also have been trained, at least in the production of chancery writings, An environment of intense circulation of books would allow him to come into contact with the humanistic script. Since we have observed a strong Portuguese imprint in the miniature, it should be noted that in the 15th century, the presence of Portuguese students is well known in Italy. In Padua, where the university was an important pole of attraction, but also in Florence, and especially in Bologna, where King Edward, about to make a decision on the crusade, had sent in 1436 a delegation with the Count of Rennes. I also turned to the material of the codex in order to reconstruct the origin of the paper. The watermark is barely visible, but can be traced back to Briquet's basilic type. The type was widespread in France, Italy, and Germany. The one that appears in the codex belongs to the group of Italian forms, but does not find a clear match. The most significant comparison are for a nucleus of forms datable between the beginning at the first half of the 15th century and coming from the northern Italy. To further support the hypothesis that the paper could come from Ferrara, a watermark almost identical to ours can be found, only by a lucky coincidence, in another manuscript coming from the Badia Fiorentina, the Conventi Soppressi 263, from the Medicinal Library of Florence. The paper is very close to that of the Repertorium, and the two manuscripts then both reached the Badia Fiorentina, but most likely in different ways. In fact, the codex, this is the Codex 263, was written by Decembrio and was certainly purchased by the monastery at the end of the 15th century. However, the presence of the watermark, almost identical to that of Conventi Soppressi A42554 on a codex made in Ferrara in 1439, suggests that they may have a similar origin. I'd like to add a few remarks on the dating of the work contained in the codex and then quickly move on to the first conclusions. The hypothesis of a dating of the codex that considers the end of 1437 as a terminus ante quem for the miniature implies that the work had already been completed when the manuscript was copied. The Repertorium has so far been placed between the 3rd and the 4th decade of the 15th century, but the Florentine Codex could also offer new references for the dating of the work. The text of our manuscript is a repertory of civil and canon law articulated in 463 entries, from absenti up to uxor. The author of the Repertorium, Giovanni Nicola de Milis, was a jurist from Brescia, active as a lawyer and auditor of the Sacra Rota in the first half of the 15th century. According to Schultz, de Milis was also the author of a procedural writing, the Allegationes in causa Brabantina matrimoniali produce, concerning the conclusion of the marriage of the Duke of Brabant, celebrated in 1418. In order to place Giovanni Nicola de Milis more precisely in the context of the history of law, it's appropriate to recall also a concilium produced in 1433. And although the text of the Repertorium circulated mainly in printed edition, with the first edition in 1475, there are some earlier manuscripts. I show here the list of the codex I found. These are just the digitalized ones that I have found during my researches. As you see, they are mostly dated. Among these 13 manuscripts, a good number dates back to the period between the 50s and 60s of the 15th century. The investigation of the manuscript that contains the Repertorium has revealed a core of characteristics that are variously recurrent in a context that can boast a high number of copies produced in a narrow period of time. The manuscripts are all in paper. 7 of them are written in 2 columns like the Florentine Codex. All of these books have pen-flourished initials at the opening of the alphabetical section and simple minor initials, rather blue for the individual item of the repertory. In this panorama, the Codex Conventi Soppressi A4-2554 appears to be the only one in which there is such a rich decoration, even though it is concentrated in a single sheet. The Florentine manuscript appears to be the only witness of the Repertorium of the Milis, decorated with a rich marginal frieze that occupies the entire first sheet and that refers to the historical event of the Portuguese crusade in Morocco. This consideration seems to confirm that the painting was required by the special occasion of the crusade that was about to start. So I move to my conclusion. The peculiarities of the manuscript presented so far led us to an object with geographical and chronological coordinates that can only be reconstructed in general terms. The main hypotheses regarding the context of production are that of a codex arrived in Florence as a gift from King Edward or his court to Gomesianes at the time when he was abbot of the Badia Fiorentina. It is precisely the emergence of the figure of Gomez within the events that concerned the territorial ambitions of the abbess family that opens the possibility of a link between the iconographic project of the Illumination and the arrival of the Codex in the Florentine monastery. The abbot's letters show how Gomez was directly involved in the mediation between the royal family and Eugene IV for the launching of the crusade. For his direct connection with the event depicted, it is possible that he even received this manuscript from some member of the royal family itself. The central moment of the realization of the miniature may be placed between 1436 and 1437, that is between the issuing of the bull Rex Regum and the beginning of the expedition. The will to celebrate the expedition, an intonation that we can read in the miniature, was justified by the papal sanction to the crusade. But the enthusiasm had to come to an end at the beginning of 1438 with the diffusion of the news of the defeat. The Codex could have reached the Badia Fiorentina in the last period that Gomez spent in Florence, that is, in the years between his return from his second journey to Portugal at the end of 1436 and his last departure from the monastery in 1440. The abbot Gomez, in fact, spent his last years as prior of the convent of Santa Cruz in Coimbra, without ever returning to Italy. In addition to this, we should also remember that Edward, to whom Gomez had been appointed advisor in 1436, had died of plague in September 1438 and had left the country in the cause of disputes over the throne. Given the narrow time span between these moments, is it possible to determine whether the manuscript had been completed or illuminated? It is not possible to determine whether the manuscript had been completed or illuminated in the Lusitanian kingdom before arriving in Florence. When Gomez returned from his second Portuguese trip, among the expenses incurred in transporting some of the abbot's possessions, the monks of the Badia had also noted the presence of a crate of books arrived from Portugal at the port of Pisa. However, not even this testimony can confirm that among the goods that reached the abbot in 1437, there was also the illuminated manuscript of the Repertorium. Moreover, we might also think that the Codex, produced on the initiative of an influential member of the court, if not Edward himself, have been entirely produced, copied, and illuminated in Italy, maybe close to the Council of Ferrara, and sent directly to Florence from there. A production entirely located in Italy, although in an environment strongly linked to the Portuguese court, seems finally the most likely. In the meeting of clerics, dignitaries, and doctors of law, or rather in the gathering of figures, including copies and booksellers, brought together by the occasion of the council, we can also see an environment where the Repertorium might have been circulated very soon, and where this copy might have been commissioned. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sofia, for such an interesting presentation. And we do not open now the debate because I'll give the floor directly to João Portugal, so that at the end of the session, we will discuss the two papers. Thank you very much. And now I present briefly João Portugal. He has a law degree by the University of Lisbon, and he is fellow and current president of the Portuguese Heraldry Institute and secretary of the Heraldry Committee of the Association of Portuguese Archaeologists. He published many articles on Portuguese heraldry and participated as a researcher in the projects In the Service of the Crown, the use of heraldry in Portuguese late medieval political communication, and Monumental Polychromy, revealing medieval colors at Badia. He will speak today about Illustrious Generation, Most High Princes, Emblematic Assertion of an outstanding and grandiose deed in the Repertorium iuris of the Badia, Fiorentina. João, you have the ground.
Thank you. I will share. Okay, I think it's okay, right?
Yes, we see perfectly.
Okay. So first of all, good afternoon. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you, Miguel, for inviting me here. Thank you also to, and very especially to Sofia Orsino for her research, her publication of this wonderful manuscript that allow us to know it, to get acquainted with it. And it's really a marvelous piece of art and also of heraldry of the Portuguese end of the Middle Ages. What I bring you here today is a sort of heraldic commentary to this research, with some perspectives agreeing with the conclusions that Sofia Orsino just told us about, but I have a few other proposals, alternatives to bring you today. So, explaining my title and as the heraldic identification of these banners is perfectly clear, I would like to point out to the cultural and historical creation of a sort of a topos, of a myth of the royal family of Avis as a model family to Portugal, but also in Christian culture, a model of a royal family starting with the parents, King João and Queen Filipa, and afterwards with their sons, called by our national poet Luís Vaz de Camões as an illustrious generation, most high princes. This building of these topos has begun very early, and we have several traces of it, not only in literary terms, in writings that King Duarte, for instance, left us, but also in epigraphic terms, in the long inscription, in the tomb, the double tomb in Badia of King John and Queen Filipa, and also in a way in the chapel itself, the Pantheon, where all these illustrious generation, most high princes, with the notable exception of King Duarte, are now and since the 15th century buried. The representation of the Portuguese princes, at that time they were called infantes. In Portuguese, it's a word that could also mean children. And the radical representation of this generation of the royal family is also found out in several armorials in Europe, even after the death of some of its members, and so with a perennial horizon. Here we have in the armorial Bergsamar the coat of arms that are clearly from King Alphonse V, the son and heir of King Duarte, but in smaller shields, the coats of arms of his uncles and the full uncles, Infantes Pedro, Henrique, João, and Fernando, and his half uncle, the future Duke of Braganza, then, the Duke of Braganza, Alfonso. This representation endured for centuries. More than 100 years after their death, this French armorial still showed us the coats of arms of all these princes, here of the Duke of Braganza, here of Infante Pedro, Infante Henrique, Infante João, and Infante Fernando. And by the tracing of simple copies, these appearances were lasting until the 17th century. In our manuscript, as Sofia Orsino has rightly said, all the male sons of King João are present, of course, with the notable exception of the firstborn, Alfonso, who died in a very young age, and is not a part of the history told by this manuscript. All them are present, I was saying, and it's perfectly all right to consider that the King of Portugal at that time was already King Duarte, because his arms as crown princess heir do not appear, and so the royal banner of Portugal is stated as used since the times of his father, King João, are due to represent him as such, as the king, followed by his brothers and half-brother, the future Duke of Braganza. The arms of Infante Pedro, the Duke of Coimbra, are clearly identified by his label, 3 points ermine, label which was an inheritance of his maternal grandfather, the Duke of Lancaster, John of Gaunt, that used this same label, ermine. It is usually linked to the earldom of Richmond, which John of Gaunt held in his early age, and with the connection precisely to the ducal house of Brittany, and the difference, the quarter of the canton of Brittany, the Frank quarter of Brittany, used to differentiate the arms of the dynasty of Dreux, and that later became the full arms of Brittany, all ermine, as is very well known. This label ermine still exists today in this tomb at Badia. It's not the original slab, it's a copy of the end of the 19th century, but it was very faithful, and you can see on our right that the spots of ermine were faithfully reproduced in this slab, which was not the case for other cases. The second Infante, after the king, of course, was Prince Henry the Navigator, the Duke of Viseu, which used a label of France, or more correctly, a label of Lancaster. As this label, azure 3 points with fleur-de-lis or was the label used by the first house of Lancaster, founded by Edmund Cranchbeck, Earl of Lancaster, and his successors until the maternal grandfather of Queen Philippa, the first Duke of Lancaster, that still used this label to differentiate his arms from the full arms of England. In the original slab of the tomb of Henry the Navigator, here on your left, you cannot see because they are very small, but it's still possible to see the fleur-de-lis carved in the label. Just a note to point out that the brother of Queen Philippa, Henry IV of England, when he was still Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Lancaster, used a label 5 points, 2 of them ermine, and the 3 others with the fleur azure with the fleur-de-lis or. Still in the English heritage, the third Prince John, Prince João, used a label argent with 3 points with a canton gules or red in each one of them. You can see them also in the slab of this tomb in Badia. It's a difference used by his grand uncle Lionel, Duke of Clarence, and also the Duke of Clarence, brother of King Henry V of England. The last legitimate son of King John, Prince Ferdinand, who died in captivity, as Sofia Orsino has said, used a different kind of difference, not on a label, but with figures extracted from the royal arms of England to lions or leopards. Here in our manuscript, they are more lions because they are staring in each other. Here in his tomb in Badia, they appear to be watching us. So they are, they say in Heraldry, gardant, and so they could be called leopards. They are facing each other in symmetry, in perfect symmetry, replacing more or less the 2 of the castles of the border of the royal arms of Portugal. This kind of solution of adopting a cadency system different of that based on labels is also a known use of the royal house of England, as the last born son of King Edward III, Thomas of Woodstock, the Duke of Gloucester, also used a border argent and not a label with figures like his elder brothers. Also, the youngest son of King Henry IV, Humphrey, also Duke of Gloucester, used precisely the same arms, that is the royal arms of England, differentiated by a border argent. Of course, at that time it would be easier to know when the last son would really be the last, because children would not usually bear arms until a certain age, and at that certain age, the hope of the king and queen to have more children would certainly be gone by then. Last, the natural son, so without any rights to the throne, but the eldest of all the sons of Barcelos, used the royal arms of Portugal, multiplied by 5, and put on a saltire, St. Andrew's cross, if you like. It's also a very well-known use of the Middle Ages for natural-born sons to wear this kind of display. The arms of his father, single or several times displayed on what in heraldry is called an ordinary. That means a figure like that, a saltire, a pole, a band, and so on. On your right, you have the same arms in an armorial made by a Portuguese herald of the beginning of the 15th century. That it is now in a Manchester University library, and it was studied by Alice Santos, which is with us as we speak. There are also other emblematic elements in this manuscript, in this image, and where I would like to point out these 2 columns sustaining the loggia, where the high prelate is giving his blessing. These 2 columns that could symbolize the civil power and the ecclesiastical power. They could symbolize the columns of Solomon's temple. They could symbolize, as we will see later, another kind of columns, are decorated with floral and vegetable elements, which are not chosen at random. If we see the column on our right side, you can see there are leaves of ivy, and ivy was the emblematic plant of King Duarte, as it's very well known by the famous portal in the unfinished chapels in Badia, with the motto of the king, but also from manuscripts with the emblematic livery of the king, red, the color of the king, red, the leaves of ivy, and also this motto, "Tant is serré." So one of the columns, the secular one, was undoubtedly the column with the vegetable element of the badge of King Duarte, so giving us more certitude than it was him, the king, at the time when this manuscript was made. The other column, which perhaps could be the spiritual one, the ecclesiastical one, the one connected, who knows, with the prelate above, as a floral element, which I think I dare to identify as an hyacinth, which means a flower connected with the idea of resurrection, and resurrection traced or being born from from blood spilled in sacrifice. I think it's a very good image for the resurrection, and so to symbolize a Christic element in this spiritual column that is on our right, which means on the most important part of the image, at least in heraldic terms. As Sofia Orsino pointed out, there are a huge representation of a scene correctly read in an anti-clockwise manner, starting at the bottom with this scene of a siege of a city, and afterwards with the escape of the defeated inhabitants of that city towards another city inland, perhaps of this continent, Africa. A more close-up view of the lower part of the manuscript seen, as Sofia pointed out, we have the boats, we have with shields on its rails, with the cross of St. George, which from the reign of King John I, King João, was a sort of national badge also of Portugal, and identifying Portuguese soldiers as such. King Alfonso V, the son of King Duarte, made a regulation of war where it is explicitly stated that if an enemy soldier was found out using the cross of St. George, he should be killed on the spot, because it was like in modern days using a Portuguese uniform to make some sort of special commando activities and undercover activities and treacherous activities, not using the badge of their own army. You can see here on your left the warriors defending the city with this kind of shield, which is clearly a Saracen shield. You can see it in more amplified way here. And you have the same type of shield in this image of the Cantiga Santa Maria from the time of Alfonso X, King of Castile. And here in this representation of Santiago fighting the Moors in battle. The display of the ships with colors in the crow's nest, but also in the rails, in shields, in the reins, in flags of several types, is very close, as Sofia Orsino has said, to the same display in the tapestries of Pastrana, which represent another military expedition a few decades later. However, we have clearly a description in the chronicle, the chronicle of the conquest of Ceuta, from another Gomes Gianes, a very common name in this story, Gomes Gianes de Zurara, which stated that the fleet, the Portuguese fleet, which was made mainly by the two parts, the fleet from Oporto and the fleet from Lisbon. The fleet from Oporto, for instance, had several colors of the liveries of the princes that held that fleet, but also of the other lords that participated in this expedition. So not only the king or the prince's liveries were used, but also liveries from other persons being subject to those princes. The fleet from Lisbon was mainly with the colors of the king, which, by the way, you can see here in the center, because the colors were exactly blue and red. By the way, during the preparation of the expedition to Ceuta, Queen Philippa died, and all these liveries were removed during the period of mourning. But they were reinstated and used as Gomejianas Zurara state as they were used in the conquest of Ceuta. Here, it's very clear in this image also that the city lies within two parts of the sea. You have boats and sea in this direction. You have boats in that direction. You have here a mount, fortified mount. You have here the city with houses, civil houses, perhaps mosques, then another part, fortified part, and then the inland. That's why I propose that it's not really Tangier that was represented and intended to be represented here. Besides, Gomejianas Zurara is very clear, and he spends lots of pages about the secrecy, the need of secrecy in order to a military expedition to the north of Africa to be successful. And we have several pages and several descriptions of ambassadors going to the court of the King of Aragon, to the Duke, even to the Duke of Burgundy, pretending almost a declaration of war in order for everyone in 1415 to think that the Portuguese king was gathering his armies and fleet to go in a war against the Duke of Burgundy and not elsewhere. But the city of Tangier is a continental one. You have the coast. Of course, this image is not, it's already from the Portuguese times, after the Portuguese conquest, but the geography did not change. On the opposite hand, the image of the town of Ceuta is matches exactly that description of that image. You mean you have the two parts of the sea, because Ceuta is a peninsula. You have here the Mediterranean, and here, which is also Mediterranean, of course, but what we call, at least in Portuguese or Spanish, the Barbasot, the Bay of Barbasot. You have here the Bay of Ceuta, here the Bay of Barbasot. And the Portuguese attack was made from the two sides, and the Portuguese fleet was around these two branches, these two bays in Ceuta. You have here this mount fortified, the Mount Acho. You have here the Medina, the castle, and here the Jebel Musa, and then afterwards what is now Morocco and Moroccan territory. Comparing the two images, I think the resemblance is, is more close, at least, to Ceuta than it could be to Tangier. And it would not be wise in preparation of the conquest of Tangier to express, to show that Tangier was the target of this expedition. And it was not, as Sofia told us also, it was not very wise to bring to memory the disaster that this expedition, as this expedition ended afterwards, and after the tragic loss of Prince Ferdinand at that expedition. I think it's time to recall the two columns. Could it be that the two columns also was delineated to remind us of the pillars of Hercules? I'm not sure. This image, the images that we found and small details also have, it is also possible to link them to descriptions, to little episodes of the conquest of Ceuta. We have two figures of kings, one in the right, the other in the left. I would propose that this one is King John, the other one is King Duarte. Then it was not king, of course, but this anachronical representation is not out of order, I think. We have here a giant warrior walking, a giant Western warrior walking inside with his troops inside the city, and perhaps it's not very odd to see here the Prince Henry the Navigator that led a column entering the city and going from east to west exactly in this direction. Perhaps it's also not difficult to see here, you have King John, you have here a warrior, and up this tower, this little tower, you have a man carrying a stone. I would propose that this is a depiction of the death of the most prominent lost of the Portuguese army in the conquest of Ceuta, Vasco Fernandes da Taíde, which was marked by this stone with the coat of arms of the Ataídes at the very same spot where he felt. He was governor of the household of Prince Henry the Navigator, and he was the most preeminent Portuguese knight that died that day. As I said before, all ships have colors that could be approached to the emblematic colors of the princes and perhaps of other persons that participated in the expedition. Here, very close, you see here the figure that I propose, that is King Edward. You have precisely flags with the red color of his livery badge. Here in the center, you have this flag, black and white, and the colors of Prince Henry the Navigator were precisely blue, the white, and the black. And in this side where we have the other image of a king, perhaps an elder king, King João, you have the colors red and blue, which were the emblematic colors of his livery also. In the other, in the right margin of the manuscript, you have the escape scene that Sofia told us just about. I would like only to point out that it's at that point that the flag of Prince Ferdinand is placed in a way that is a bit odd. You can see that the hierarchical of the sons of King João is very well represented, also according to heraldic rule, which means that our left, the heraldic dexter, is more important than the left, and the upper part is more important than below. So we have here the most important one. Then on our right, but in the heraldic left, a bit below the second sun, the third sun a bit below on the other side, the fourth sun. Then afterwards, in the right margin, Prince Ferdinand, and last, the natural son, the future Duke of Braganza. Why not? Because we have still we had still space here. Why not put this flag here a bit below, and then the arms of Prince Ferdinand here, you know, in a more prominent place than the last brother of this brotherhood. Well, I don't think that any explanation concerning the disaster of Tangier could be applied here. I used to first I thought that like the flag of the prince that he is held captive by the Moors is placed on Moor land, where Moors still dominated, but I don't think so. I think in this context that this flag is placed here as a token of a special interest and special importance than Prince Ferdinand had in what concerned the conquest of Africa. He held correspondence with the abbot Gomes Yanes. He had several businesses in Rome that were held through the abbot Gomes Yanes to the papal court, and perhaps it's exactly Prince Ferdinand, the special connection with the abbot Gomes Yanes, that could explain to us the making of this manuscript. He is clearly in a more specific, because different place, and a place that is a place of honor, as the continuation of the seminal moment of Ceuta. Ceuta as the beginning of the conquest of Africa. Then we have the prelate. We have the prelate, which undoubtedly as a meter, but also has here some tassels that suggest the tassels of a galero, which usually is connected with a cardinal's hat. Well, in this respect, I would propose that this prelate is no one else than the abbot Gomes Yanes himself. And Gomes Yanes represented at a specific time of his life. First, he has a meter, of course, so a meter that could be used generally by those with the Episcopal order, but also by some, at least some abbots. And unlike the bishops, he is giving his blessing with his bare hands, without gloves. Gloves were a privilege of the Episcopal order, and abbots did not use them. For that reason, you have here on your right this crozier of with a veil that was used by the croziers used by abbots in order for the hands, the soiled hands without gloves, they did not touch the crozier. The bishops using gloves did not need this kind of veil. By accident, this is a tomb of a Portuguese cardinal who was Archbishop of Lisbon, but however, the crozier was sculpted in his tomb with his veil. And here, of course, you have the Badia Fiorentina with the the meter crowning is coat of arms. But the point is that it is possible for a abbot to be represented exactly like that, with a meter and bare hands, in this case, giving a blessing. But what about the tassels? Before that, you can see here a painting a few decades later of Saint Dominic of Silos, a Benedictine abbot, also using a mitre. You can see here the crozier with the veil, and precisely without gloves. But what about these tassels? I was saying, what about these tassels and the gesture of blessing? I would propose that this image was made during 2 years, a bit before than Sofia Orsino said. I would say that it would be made in 1435, 1436, precisely the 2 years where Abbot Gomes served as papal nuncio to Portugal, not a legate a latere, but a nuncio, therefore representing the Pope in Portugal, precisely also in those negotiations concerning the conquest of Africa, the ecclesiastical benefices of Africa, and the struggle with Castile concerning the right to conquer Africa. The gesture of benediction is a very important one to a papal emissary. The first duty of the papal legate was precisely to bless the people, to bless the Catholic communities which were visited on behalf of the Pope, as a representative of the Pope, in a way as a message of union, of communion, but also as a message of power. The power of blessing was exercised by the Pope through his nuncio. Also, this is at least existed clearly in all times for legates a latere. This specific mission was also gave also right to the use of papal garments. The papal insignia were used by the legates. These were the kind of privilege always given to cardinals, but there are references around this time also to this privilege to be given to nuncios which were not cardinals, as our abbot wasn't. So I would propose that these tassels were a symbol of this mission to Portugal, together with the blessing given to Portugal, but also to the Portuguese mission. In conclusion, I would say that we have here the seminal moment of the conquest of Africa, the conquest of Ceuta, stating that the Portuguese crown earned the right to be the church spearhead in Africa, recovering territories unlawfully held by Muslim powers. We have here, with the flags, a dynastic dimension. It's not an historical one, as Sofia Orsino said correctly. Prince John and Prince Ferdinand did not participate in the actual conquest of Ceuta, but King John is not here also in these flags. well, we can say he still is here because the king never dies. It's the second body of the kings that prevails here in this flag. But it's more like a dynastic. This brotherhood, the Portuguese princes, are the current receivers of this right to conquest Africa. We have the papal nuncio giving his blessing to all this enterprise, and bearing others, namely the King of Leon and Castile, from trying to interfere in this mission that would proceed with the scape, the historical scape, doubled with the future escape from every other city conquered by the Portuguese princes, namely by Prince Ferdinand, at that time preparing precisely the expedition to Tangier. And that was mainly the ideas that I would like to bring to you here today. Again, thanking Sofia Orsino for letting us be aware of this expanded manifestation of the medieval art and medieval heraldic art. Thank you.
Thank you very much, João, for such an interesting presentation that well completes so well what Sofia Orsino has told us in the first part of this meeting. And now I will open the debate. Perhaps I can open it myself with two questions. To Sofia Orsino, I would like to ask you if the choice of the red and blue for decoration of the initials of this manuscript is a common choice of the author that you think was the author of this manuscript. And my question is also motivated by what João Portugal just told us about the emblematic colors of King John I of Portugal, that I think by this time were also the livery colors of the royal house, perhaps independently from the color badge, the color of the badge of each king. So was this choice, this chromatic choice, a common choice, or do you think it is something specific of this manuscript, perhaps with an heraldic intention behind it? And to João, well, we had many occasions of speaking about this illumination and sharing our point of views in the Portuguese Heraldry Institute. But still, I would like to return to the question of deliveries that we can see on the boats of this illumination. You pointed out, of course, the liveries that are undoubtedly identifiable. No, the livery of the king, John I, the livery of King Duarte, the red livery of King Duarte, and perhaps the livery of the infant Henrique, Duke of Viseu. And I would like to ask you, what about the others? Do we have any other sources to identify these liveries? Because perhaps the funerary chapel in Badia can still offer some clues about this identification. Not by the paintings, of course, we know it is not possible, but perhaps using the glasses, stained glasses. Perhaps if we try to revisit the stained glasses of the funerary chapel of Badia with these colors in mind, perhaps we will be able to find some matches. That's just a clue. I don't know if it will really work out or not. And one particular livery was interesting for me. It was the green livery that we can see in one of the ships. This green livery, of course, we know it as the livery of the House of Braganza. Now, we don't know the colors of the first Duke of Braganza, but since his arms are there, perhaps it is his livery that is also depicted in this illumination. And well, that's just an hypothesis. Thank you both for your interesting presentations, and perhaps I give you now the floor to answer to my questions, and then we share with other people. So if you want, or Sofia.
For me, it's okay. It's if João Portugal agrees, I can start with the first question, for which I thank you. And if you were referring to the pen-flourished red and blue initials, they are very common, not only in manuscript from this period, but also in this kind of manuscripts. For example, in the 13 manuscript I was referring to, I wasn't able to show the images. In red and blue, because they are color very common in this type of decoration, and in the other manuscripts they are the
Now?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Now.
Okay. So we have here the red of King Edward. We have here what perhaps would be the Prince Henry, Infante Henrique, and we have to a green dragon. If the choice of green to the Braganza crest, or even before, was used as a livery by the Count of Barcelos, future Duke of Braganza, Well, I don't know. I don't know. It's possible. In this image, I would say it's a odd coincidence. I think that the one who made this image had very, very good information about what went on at that time. The Chronicle of Gomes de Zurara was only written a few decades afterwards, but for sure there were histories, manuscripts, descriptions circulating before. The case of Vasco Fernandes da Taíde, the death of Vasco Fernandes da Taíde, I spoke about, was a subject of books that circulated in the French and the Burgundy courts, stating the way that the good knight died at this conquest and the grief of his mother. Concerning Badia and the glasses, well, most of them, as you know, are not original. Several of them are from the 19th century restoration, and I would say that only with the good expertise that we fortunately have in Badia concerning glasses, it's our only chance to choose what is perhaps small pieces, the small fragments that are still original, and perhaps believe that the copies afterwards made could have some basis, some solid basis on its making. I'm not sure. Several arms represented in these glasses are very faithful to the tombs, but the tombs still exist. The tombs, the stone is harder to lose than the glass, and I'm not so sure that the glass makers that in the end of the 19th century made all these new windows have some kind of information, reliable information from before.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Well, but that's something we can explore surely. Thank you very much. So now I ask all the participants if you have any question or any commentary to make, both to Sofia and to João.
Miguel, I would like to say something about the presentations. First place to congratulate both Sofia and João. First, Sofia, for the wonderful manuscript that, are you hearing me?
Yes, we hear you. All right.
First for the manuscripts and also the interpretation that she made, and João for the heads that he made about the hypothetical representation of the Tangier or Ceuta. Only I would like to say that perhaps these manuscripts with all the richness of the coats of arms of the Avis family, perhaps had the head of some men related to the heroes or the king of arms, because the codes, the colors, and the meanings of and the symbols related to these coats of arms was something that the heralds and the king of arms were in charge to make. So it is possible that it was a Portuguese person that made this manuscript, and the richness of the coats of arms are precisely the element that someone knows so well the Portuguese royal family and the infants. And I think that's possible. I don't know, but I think that's possible. And once more, congratulations both of you. And Sofia, I would like to say to you that you are so young and study Latin. It's a richness for medieval European history. So I'll congratulate you for so specific studies because it's so difficult to find someone that speaks and learn Latin nowadays. In Portugal, we have so many problems with the Latin transcriptions and paleographical documents, and to see so young women study this subject, I think that you are a wonderful person, and I will thank you so much.
Thank you, Alice. Yes, Sofia.
Yes, I really thank you very much. And I would like to say also that it is possible then not only the author of the miniature is a Portuguese miniaturist, but also the scribe could be Portuguese. But as I said before, there are a few elements that are in common with the humanistic script that spread from Florence in the 15th century. As I showed before, there are the right S, the loop G, and some other elements that had, let me think that there was a context of a contact between a scribe, learner in a Gothic and Iberian context, but also who had seen some exemplars made in Italy in the time between the first 10 years and maybe later of the 15th century. So this is possible, almost likely, both for the miniature, both for the script of the text.
Thank you, Sofia. And I'll point out also on that subject of the miniaturist that, well, Alice said that it's probably should be a Portuguese because of his knowledge of Portuguese royal heraldry and emblematic, of course. But I'll point out also that the interaction between painters or miniaturists and heralds was of some complexity. I mean, heralds often were miniaturists and painters, of course, but they could also provide painters with their knowledge, their specific knowledge. So these are not closed worlds, and these are not closed professions like ours nowadays. And you could very possibly have a Portuguese herald giving miniaturists the right information in order to produce this very correct representation of Portuguese dynastic heraldry. That was, well, I think it would be exactly the kind of thing that would happen in these times with no problem. And it could be, of course, an Italian miniaturist. So, does anyone else have any question or comment to our speakers? No, Alessandra, I don't know if you want to say something.
Yes, I would like to thank very much the speaker for this very, very interesting lecture. And we have all learned a lot, and I'm very happy and proud because this is the proof that the UC Illuminatum research team is making good work, because we are discovering, the member of the group are discovering some interesting manuscripts that link Portugal with the rest of Europe. So this was the finality of our group, and it's very, very important, this link of Portugal with the rest of Europe and with Italy too. And this is for me very important, this link with Italy, because I think that Portugal and Italy are linked historically very much, and that these links must be more investigated. So I'm very happy. Thank you very much also for this very important collaboration with the Portuguese Institute of Heraldry, because this webinar and this third edition of webinar show that heraldry is a very important element in study of manuscripts, and also juridical manuscripts, but manuscripts most in general. And so I have some technical information to communicate to you. So we have the next session of the seminar that will be in person and online. And we will have the pleasure to host Giovanni Travagliato, that is professor at the University of Palermo, that will show us some juridical manuscripts from Sicily. So again, some link with Italy and Portugal. And so I give you appointment to this next session. And I thank you all the people that are here today and in this evening to hear our webinar. And I hope to see you again. We hope to see you again, Miguel and I, at the next session. So thank you very much. And I think that we can close. If Miguel don't like to say something more, we can close the session. Thank you very much again to all, and bye-bye.
Yes. Thank you very much. And I will just add one thing, if I may, because I at the Portuguese Heraldry Institute session, I ended with that, and I think it's a nice way of ending this session also, referring that of course Portugal has an intense relation with Italy, but in particular with Florence, and Portuguese relation with Florence dured all along the 15th century with particular intensity, beginning with, of course, with Abbot Gomes, but involving also one of Florentine Renaissance masterpieces, that is the funerary chapel of Cardinal João of Portugal at Samignato al Monte. And generally, people think that this special relation ends with the construction of this funerary chapel, but it doesn't, because both King John II and his wife, Queen Leonor of Portugal, had also intense relations with Florence, with the Florentine culture, and a significant part of these relations were of an artistic nature, of course, but another significant part of these relations were involved books, circulation, production, of books. So I think it's a very interesting subject, both to Italian and to Portuguese researchers, to deepen this kind of Portuguese Italian, of Portuguese Florentine relations. Thank you very much, the two speakers, Sofia and João, and thank you all that were present in our session today.
So goodbye to
everyone.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.